for permits, and they're issued by the bailiff following consideration by the Public Entertainments Panel. Could you tell us a bit about your experience that you've had in needing to apply for public permits?
Okay, so in terms of the process, it was, for me certainly, it was quite a steep learning curve of how to do it. Lots of people on the island think they can put an event on, or think they've got a great idea to put an event on, but then when it actually comes to it, there is quite a lot to it that you probably don't think of, and that's where people like me from the parish or the panel actually are generally quite supportive of what you have to do, and it being an island and it being Jersey and us all kind of knowing each other, I know I can certainly get in touch with them quite quickly, saying, "Oh, I'm thinking of doing this. Can you give me some advice on it?" Obviously, I think there is an expectation when you're doing a public event that you follow some form of best practice. Normally, it's a UK document called the Purple Guide. Is certainly what I follow, and is what the little bits of legislation that exist here and there sort of follow. Overall, my experience has been pretty good. There's not been a time I can think of where I've had reason to sort of, on reflection, question the decision making that was made. Obviously at the time when you're seeing a big piece of work that you've spent ages on being scrutinised, I think there's a danger where you can take that quite personally and think, oh, they're finding faults in this. That's something that I've done wrong. Once you sort of step back and you look at it, it does kind of make sense. And my view is that the panel aren't there to tell you whether you can do an event or not. They are there to tell you whether you can do an event safely or not. And the fact that it currently is effectively apolitical is something that I think is very positive.
So that's useful to have that perspective. So I suppose, can you give us a tangible example of an event you would organise outside the parish hall but in St Helier? So should we take, for example, I don't know, St Patrick's Day, you put an event on the parade. What does that involve from your perspective? So
that involves a comprehensive event plan, risk assessment, significant amount of stakeholder management, whether that be I class the panel as one of our stakeholders that need to be managed. So then, where you need to look after residents, you need to look after your suppliers. So you submit plans to them. Generally, we run about 6 months in advance with our very first initial draft. At least certainly to get the dates in for what we want to do. Then nearer the time, there'll be revisions. You may or may not get called to a panel meeting, dependent on whether the panel have questions on the documents you've submitted. But my general experience, and this isn't just my own experience, I've seen happen with other event organisers, is if your paperwork is good and your documents are good, the panel are pretty happy, and they'll sort of go, yeah, that's fine. We can see you've documented how you're going to do that. They'll turn up on site and they'll do some inspections and that sort of thing to make sure that you are operating as per the plan that you've laid out. But I mean, it would be kind of silly if they didn't, wouldn't it? Because they need to make sure that you're doing what you said you're going to, and that's how the event process works. Now, after the event, there's quite often one or two questions, or you may in some cases get called into a debrief. That hasn't happened to me yet, so I don't know if that's luck or skill, but yeah, that remains to be seen. But I'm certainly grateful for the support that they've offered me so far.
And are you involved on the other side? Does the town hall play a part in permitting certain events?
So whilst we're not a named member of the panel, we work closely with the bailiff chambers in that we are the landlord for a number of different sites, and we are a big tick box that we have to be on side, and we put some of our own conditions on using our space. So if you want to use our space, you can't have glass in it, you have to look after it, you have to be a good neighbour to the people that you're around. So if we carry quite a lot of weight as well, and if we were to write to the panel and say, really concerned, really worried about this event, they will support us, and they'll make sure that, and they'll sort of look at our knowledge and our remit as well. So it works quite well in that respect.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Connor. That's very interesting. Can you just give us a bit more information and clarify what presence you do have on the panel and how that's changed over time, and have as a result of you being involved, being able to change anything over time, and in what way?
So is that in terms of as a regulator or as an organiser? Is that just
Both of you could
Okay.
give us a different perspective
Sure.
on each.
So
perspective on each.
so as an organiser, it's sort of like I just said, we would come forward and we would obviously answer questions that the panel members have. I do wonder if perhaps when I first started this about 3 years ago, there was a couple of times I went to panel meetings and it felt a little bit like I'm not entirely sure why I'm here. The questions you've asked are all in the documents that I've sent you, but what I've noticed in sort of more recent times is you'll only get called into a panel meeting if you really need to go to one, and the questions you get asked are really relevant and aren't just noted down somewhere, because it is going to a panel meeting is a naturally slightly stressful environment. It's a bit like this in the sense that you sit usually in one of these rooms actually, and they're all on one side and you're on another. So I see how it can be intimidating to people who are perhaps going into it. As a regulator as such, we don't have a permanent seat on the panel, and nor should we, because we are an event organiser in our own right. And I'd be incredibly nervous of being in a position where I was marking my own homework effectively, sitting on the panel too. Now, obviously, in St Helier, we're a little bit different. We are the only parish with an events team and professional event organisers who work for the parish themselves. So it is more about sort of having a dialogue with the individual panel members, and that actually works really well, because if we have concerns about an event that's coming on, we're worried about noise. I'm certainly quite comfortable talking to environmental health, for example, and it goes both ways, and we have a very good working relationship between the panel members, certainly for the events that other people are organising, because a big part of my role is wanting to see successful events happen in the island. There are lots and lots of event organisers of lots and lots of different abilities, shall we say, on the island, and I want to see as many events happen as possible. Since I started, the volume of events in town has definitely increased, and we will continue to support an event organiser so long as they're safe and so long as they're good neighbours to the residents.
Mm-hmm. And as a regulator, have you been able to influence any of the legislation that's developed over time? I
don't believe so.
No.
I guess what I do say to my team when we're putting events on is we need to be the gold standard. We need to set the bar of this is how you run an event, because if we're sort of telling people this is what you have to do, we should be expected to do it ourselves. So that's making sure you've done all your letter drops to people around, making sure that you're looking after residents, making sure you're putting on something that's safe. If we're sort of trying to set and enforce a standard, we need to prove that it isn't that difficult. And a lot of that stuff, and a lot of the stuff that is in the legislation, is in the guidance of putting on events, isn't difficult. I appreciate that a lot of it does come with a cost. We're lucky in the way that we're funded, that obviously we watch the pounds and pennies, but we aren't relying on every single person coming in and buying a ticket as our main funding mechanism for our event. So I appreciate there is a cost to health and safety and to doing an event properly, but it is the cost of doing an event, and if you can't afford it, you probably shouldn't really be doing the event.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Andrews, can I pass over to you?
Yes, yeah. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, what difference is there for businesses, for instance, who have an existing licence and they often are holding events, compared to entities, for instance, who are just running a one-off event, in terms of the dialogue with yourself, who obviously works at the parish of St Helier, and how that then correlates with the bailiff's consultation panel?
Sure. So if you have a licence yourself, I think it's a P49 or whatever, I might have the numbers wrong there. What that effectively means is that your venue has been checked to know that you've got enough facilities on site for an event to run there smoothly. Generally, where the panel would be involved, in my experience, is when you're doing something somewhere that isn't normally as their day-to-day operations running events. Now, you could argue that People's Park is an event space, but People's Park is just a park. It's a bit of grass. Therefore, it needs to have some kind of regulation around it. I guess we probably wouldn't tend to, at the parish, have too much dialogue with people who are just operating under their P49 and their licence. That is, of course, until such a time as things go wrong or there's noise complaints or whatever. That's a sort of probably the same. That's probably the same with any type of licensing that we deal with. But we interact a lot with those who do public events. I mentioned before that there are all kinds of levels of event organizer on the island, and there are some who definitely need a lot more hand holding than others, and that's fine. It's what we're there for. We're there to support people where we can, provided that the end outcome is a good thing and a good event that people will enjoy.
Yeah, and also in your experience being an events manager for the parish, when would you go through the process of seeking a licence for an event, and in your experience as well, when would it not be appropriate in your capacity as a events manager for Parish of St Helier?
So it's a little bit complicated because technically civic events don't actually come under the draft Unlawful public entertainment stuff. But what I do is anything I do outside that is bigger than 30 or 40 people, I will always go through the panel, and that's purely as an insurance, effectively, for us. It means, and also it helps keep me sharp. It means that someone else is looking at my plans, who hopefully knows how to read them, and it means that we're operating appropriately and above board.
Yeah, and in your experience as well, do you see there being a difference between public and private events that are held in St Helier?
Yes.
Yes,
I do.
Yeah.
You're going to want me to explain that now. Public events are generally not for profit, obviously. I organise two of the largest public events in St Helier. They are Fet St Helier and Havre de Pas Festival. They are large. They're big. They take over. But just because something is a public event and is a free event for people to attend, should not mean that it shouldn't be delivered safely and shouldn't be delivered doing the right thing. And I get it. When you've got, and I see it quite often when people will phone me saying, I've got a great idea for an event. I want to do this. And I'm like, great. Have you thought about X, Y, Z? Oh no, I haven't. I thought I could just turn up and do it. Okay, let's just take a step back. I really do sort of deal with every end of the spectrum. So people like that to people who have fantastic documentation, risk assessments, brilliant teams behind them, and we're very lucky, not just in St Helier but as an island for the quality of the events that we do get here.
Yeah. And I guess my next question would be, obviously St Helier is very busy in terms of the events that it often will be holding, but how do other parishes compare with this Parish of St Helier?
I don't really know if I'm honest. I know that no one else certainly has a full-time events person as we do. I suspect that given that it's something that we're doing relatively often and we're working on it all the time, that we are, I would like to think that we are looked on as a trustworthy source of events and people who know what they're doing, because we are professionals and it's what we're employed to do. But I think there's probably a certain amount of give and take as well when you're doing a seaside festival which is expected to have 9,000 people a day. The risk profile between that and a village fete in one of the smaller parishes is probably very different, or I'd like to hope so anyway. But again, that being said, it should still be delivered safely.
Yeah. And I know you've obviously touched upon some of the people you've been dealing with who maybe have no prior experience, and you'll more or less have to start from the beginning with them. But would you say there is potentially too much red tape involved with the current process, especially for somebody who is new to the event scene, who's trying to do something?
I don't think there's too much red tape as such, But what I do think is it perhaps could be a little bit clearer what the expectation is.
Okay. Yeah. No, thank you very much. Thank you, Jack.
Is there, following on from that question, is there a perception out there, or is there a reality perhaps that the steps that one needs to go through could be centralised in a more user-friendly way?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is sometimes a perception that the bailiffs panel are this big, scary sort of Machiavellian villain that is going to tell you can't do stuff and you can't be fun. I don't think that is necessarily the case. They are generally there asking legitimate and appropriate questions. There are every, again, I go back to it, there are every level of event organiser on this island, some who need a significantly larger amount of hand-holding than the others. And yes, it should be celebrated and people should be able to put events on, but there does come times when someone has to say, hang on a second, what you are doing isn't safe. Let's just take a step back. And you probably shouldn't be doing that.
Can I may be preempting a question slightly, but if we put this in the context, so the Minister has indicated that he does want to change the current system, the current regulatory system, take it away from the bailiff and introduce, presumably, an administrative system which is either, I imagine it's going to be in-house at the department, or it would be an independent body which you go to organise an event. In your experience, do you think there's a need for change?
I think there's possibly a need for change in terms of making the expectation a little bit clearer, but I would be incredibly nervous about that the role of event regulation going into central government. There's a few reasons for that. Firstly, where it sits at the moment is apolitical, which I think is good, and also the central government are in the business now of organising their own events. They have their own events team, and there's a real danger where you could end up marking your own homework, which I don't think would be appropriate at all, and certainly you'd be very easy for there to be a perception of there being an unfair advantage to the government putting on an event as opposed to anyone else.
Okay. Yeah. I suppose if I was playing devil's advocate, I'd say that there's an issue when the bailiffs department puts on events, maybe, or facilitates them, and also issues a licence. But I know that's probably fairly few and far between.
Yeah, it's few and far between, and I know that they bring in external people as well when they put on events. Yeah.
No, that's useful. I suppose. Well, I think we might come back to that question about what's envisaged in the and potentially in the new law. But if, Deputy Wilson, can I pass over to you?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just, before I move on to my real question, just follow up on your comments about expectations. What is it that you mean by that?
So it's not just very all that clear where to find the information about what is expected to be within some of your event documentation. If you know where to look, you can probably find it. But one thing I hear from a lot of event organisers is it would be really good if there was some sort of guide. Now, in the UK, they have the Purple Guide, which I mentioned, which is, I believe, semi-government funded, and it's pretty much what the few bits of Jersey legislation that exist is based off of. But something that was a really clear guide of when you're putting a public event on, here's what we expect you to have security for per person, here's what we expect you to have for this, here's what we expect you to have for that. That is something that would be, I think, really useful for event organisers who are starting out.
Right, okay. So could you just clarify for the public where they go to get that kind of information now?
So you can find it if you go on gov.je, there's a public events page, and on there is some of the information at the moment.
But there are some gaps, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So if I could, Conor, I'd like to just ask you about the proposed regulations, which are due to expire in July 2027. What's your view on the appropriateness of this time frame?
I think there's a lot of work to do between now and then. But then, does it need changing? I suppose is the bigger question. What I would be interested to know is what is the problem that is trying to be solved here? Because at the moment that isn't clear to me.
Okay.
So it's kind of hard to say without knowing that.
Sure, yeah. So are you saying that you think it's right for these triennial regulations to be constantly rolled over?
I mean, I'm no expert in Jersey law. I don't know why they can't just be made like a normal law that just lasts forever. Like I don't understand. That's probably for people with much more knowledge than me to argue over. The point is we do need to have some form of legislation, some form of law in place, because when everything's fine and everything is safe and everything happens, it's not a problem. You don't need it. When things go wrong, and we're very lucky in Jersey that the risk profile when we do events is generally quite low in terms of the stuff that happens with public order. I'm not aware personally in the last, certainly in the time that I've been in the role of anyone putting on an event and anything happening that has been so bad that someone's faced a custodial sentence or anything like that. But the point is, you need to have something to fall back on, and you need to have something in the background that can be used as and when it's needed.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So, what would your attitude be to the current draft on the Unlawful Public Entertainment's Jersey Regulations 2002, which establishes a penalty of imprisonment of up to 6 months, an unlimited fine, or both, for the offence of holding a public entertainment without the permission of the bailiff? Is that necessary?
The law has to have teeth, otherwise, what's the point of having a law? Almost would be my immediate thoughts on that. Is 6 months in prison appropriate? Is a fine? I don't know. I'm not a law expert or a judicial expert in terms of what appropriate sentencing should be. What I would probably do is probably look to other jurisdictions, look to the UK. So look, if you don't go to if you do a big event and it doesn't go successfully, then see what the penalties are over there. Now I know that the legislation initially came in all that time ago when people were having, I think it was raves were happening in public a long time ago, certainly before my time, and I from what I understand, knowing the vague bit of history that I do about it, was that it was perhaps pulled together quite quickly. So you have got this law. This is something that we haven't spoken about, but there are actually a number of laws that you operate under when you put an event on. I'm sure the other people who've spoken to you have told you about them, but so you have this that you work under. There's the Roadworks and Events Law. There's the Health and Safety Acts. There's any number of other bits of legislation that you are operating under. So whether there's actually scope for a wider piece of work of, right, we need something specific for events that encapsulates all of this, or whether the right answer is to look at the other laws that exist and see if they should be expanded. I don't know what the answer is to that. I think that's probably for you to discuss at some point.
And to your knowledge, has there ever been contravention of permit conditions? And if so, how were they discovered?
Not
in your time.
Certainly not in my time, and I think I probably work closely enough with the islands events community that I would know about it. I am aware of events being told that they can't go ahead because they've been deemed unsafe. I'm aware of bits of event infrastructure, the Health and Safety Inspectorate telling them to remove it because it is unsafe. But I'm not aware of any prosecutions under the unlawful public entertainment.
Can I just ask a supplementary?
Sure.
Do you know if there are any situations where there would need to be a joint application for an event, and what issues may arise from that? So I suppose I'm thinking about something like the Battle of Flowers, where you've actually got border issues with different parishes and things.
Sure. So generally, the event permit, which is what you get once you've gone to the panel, it's I sort of joke of how do you show the amount of money that your event budget is? How do you show, say you're spending 60 grand on an event? How do you see what 60 grand looks like on one bit of paper? Because obviously you can't do your event without the permit. So generally you would apply for that centrally, but one of the questions that you do get asked when you go to the panel, I know this happens, is have you consulted with the places where you're going to be, with the areas that you're going to be in? Now, I know that this happens because I get asked by event organisers when they've got stuff that's crossing over different zones, but also by the panel who will say, just checking that they've checked with you, because they're doing their homework and making sure that everyone's on side. But again, that's kind of the bit of where my role in the parish crosses into this bit of regulation, and where we will support and we will help where we can.
Is there a chicken and egg? I mean, that's what you're referring to with the cost of the event versus the piece of paper. Do you need to? At what point do you know that you can go ahead with the event? Presumably when you get the.
So yeah, officially, you know when you get the permit. That's when you are legally able to do it. It's the same as an alcohol license.
And what's the lead-in time? So if you're when you put an event on, what's the general lead-in time for a new event or a recurring event?
So a new event runs on you sort of generally about a 6 month. Yeah. We're thinking of doing this, and then it sort of flows from there. There is if it's a recurring event, you can generally be a little bit closer if you're following near enough the exact same plan, because it has effectively already been scrutinised. And then you'll get your permit in due course before the event starts.
How far in advance do you tend to get the permit?
It really varies. It really varies. Physically, you can get it the week of, but you can also get it a few weeks before as well. There doesn't seem to be much of a rhyme or reason into when you get it, but you will generally, after a panel meeting, get a sort of a nod of this looks okay, this is fine. There won't be any issues with it. The permit is, I mentioned it before, it is effectively a piece of paper. It is generally what's letting you do it, although an appropriate one, an important one at that.
It's not immediately related, but presumably when you put on an event, say on the parade, and it's your event, you still have to apply for a licence. Who do you apply to? In terms of alcohol license. So for an alcohol license, the way that we do it is when we get vendors to transfer their own license into, because obviously the constable can't issue himself with a license. So right. So we get the vendors who are coming in to transfer licenses from different venues onto that location. And if you ever run your own bar, or would it always be an outside? It would always be an outside license. The parish doesn't hold an alcohol license. No. Okay.
Can I just ask a supplementary to that, Chair, please?
Of course. Yeah.
So if they're going to transfer their licence, does that mean that they suspend their existing trading?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. It's probably a question for licensing rather than me.
Okay, that's fine. Have we got any other questions at the moment? I think I've got a few to ask. But anyone else got questions at the moment?
Not at the moment, no, I'm okay.
So I suppose you may have partly answered this already, because, and I think there are a plurality of voices around the issues, around whether, in fact, there needs to be a new framework. There are people who say the current framework works quite well. I think there are probably users who don't really mind what system they've got, so long as it's effective from the user point of view. But are there any elements you think that could be addressed in terms of quick wins or other issues, if there is new legislation coming forward? And it could be directly to do with entertainment, it could be alcohol licensing as well.
I think alcohol licensing is perhaps a different discussion. The whole notion that we have to transfer in someone's licence for an event is completely bonkers. You're transferring it from a venue. I've never quite got my head around it. I don't understand why we don't have a system whereas in the UK you license the individual rather than the premises. That would be the way that I would certainly do it. So you know that the person who is there, who's running running an alcohol concession is competent, and in terms of quick wins, I think the only thing for me would be just and this might be a bit selfish, but it would just be somewhere that has a more clear guide of here's exactly what the expectation is, because it is often a role that I end up fulfilling is supporting some event organisers with when you go to the panel, here's what the expectation is going to be, here's what you should do, and it's not a problem. It's arguably it's kind of what we're there for, because if us as the parish, if we can't give people a hand and support them, then something's going a bit wrong. And we're grateful to do it, but it would be really helpful if it was documented somewhere.
Do you think the panel could front load its permission? Does that make sense in the sense? So I know there's a difference for a parish putting on an event, because, like you said, the risk element is reduced. You can carry the risk, but a private event organiser might need to ensure ticket sales before the event can even be advertised. So have you got any thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, you see it at the bottom of event posters, don't you? Subject to bailiff's permission, and it's a really interesting question. How do you mean front load?
I guess guaranteeing a provisional permit much earlier in the process, so that you can then start to organise the event.
Yeah, I mean, from a practical point of view, I'm sure if you were as an event organiser to talk to the bailiff's office and say, look, I really need to get together, and you had your paperwork and you had your stuff in order. Because if I'm putting the documentation together for an event isn't difficult. There's just a process that you have to follow, and there's just certain boxes that you have to tick. That's all there is to it. And you need to make sure you do it, by the way. And I think you can work out pretty quickly by reading an event plan or a risk assessment that's drawn up by someone, whether I'm going to be getting phone calls at 2 a.m. when they're rewriting it or not. I think in real terms you can probably guarantee that an event will generally happen pretty early on. I know that's kind of doesn't really answer your question. I don't think.
No, I think that's good. Well, look, I think that's all I've got to ask. I don't know if you've got any other questions.
I suppose the only thing is, for me, is, do you, in your view, what benefits would be derived by bringing the legislation forward in a shorter time frame?
Would it perhaps lead to more certainty for event organisers? I mean, large-scale event organisers generally work 2-3 years in advance, at least. If they don't know what the legislation is that they're going to be working to, it's a bit like doing a jigsaw where you don't have all the pieces or a picture of what you're putting the jigsaw together to look like.
I mean, I suppose one question arising from that is, can you envisage any or have there been any scenarios where you might have put an event on, or someone who might have put an event on, say, in a much shorter scale of time, but hasn't been able to do it just because they didn't have the lead in, so to respond to a certain event? I mean, I suppose the football is a good one. So, if you find out that England or another team has made it into the final of the World Cup and you want to set up an event, would you be able to do that in short order?
Yes, and I've done it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Was it a problem?
It wasn't a problem. The thing about that I'd kind of touched on before is the panel aren't there to say whether an event can happen as such or not. They're there to determine whether an event is safe, and dependent on the scale or the size of what it is that you're doing, you can do that relatively quickly. And also, there is probably a certain amount to be said for if you're a known entity going to the panel, so you're a well-known event organizer, for example, you have a track record of doing good events. I wouldn't suggest that you're looked on more favourably than others, but what I would say is there are some event plans that I get that are an absolute joy to read because everything's ticked off and everything's covered off in it. There are some that leave a lot to be desired. And I think if you bring the experience and the knowledge to event organisation, it isn't actually that difficult Whether people come or not, that's a that's a different matter. But it isn't necessarily that difficult. And also, I think it costs £40 for a events permit. For that, you get all of the officer time to scrutinise your event effectively. You get the police to turn up if they're needed, and certainly for the bigger stuff, the police will have a strong police presence. You get quite a lot for that £40. If you were in another jurisdiction in the UK, you have to pay every police officer that attends your event, and I'm glad we're not in that position here.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for coming. Have you got anything you want to ask the panel before we finish?
No, not at all. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Conor.
Thank you for your time again.